So as you can see, if you look at my elevation, okay, so this is my south and north elevation. So I'm looking, if I go to my floor plan, you'll notice that, ooh, let's change the scale of this so that it's legible. If I'm looking at this floor plan, you'll notice that we're actually looking at either this elevation here or this elevation here. If you look at either of these other elevations, you're gonna see something that looks like this. It's not gonna look like what you want it to look like, okay? So let's go back to the north elevation. Let's go the other way around. You'll notice that we created 5 wall types. All of them go up 1 level in sequential order, okay? So our first wall type would go up, the top constraint would be level 1, and then it moves up to level 2, 3, 4, 5, until we get to our final level 5 wall type, okay? So let's start from scratch. We'll go ahead and just create a new project, and I'll go through the first couple of wall types with you. I'll do like 1, 2, and 5. And how to create those, and then ultimately that should fill in the blanks for the remaining ones, okay? So we're gonna go open a new instance of Revit, all right? I'm gonna go over to File, New, and in the exercise it tells you to open up a construction template. You can do that, that's fine, you'll get the same end result. I should actually change it though to architectural. Architectural is just a little bit more simple. There's a few less things going on in the template. So we're gonna click on architectural, click on OK, and we're going to get a nice fresh file with nothing in it. Okay, so as I mentioned last class, by default, when you start a new architectural template, it's going to give you level 1 and level 2. Okay, so that already gives us a little bit of a head start. We don't need to create 2 of the levels. All right, so I'm going to change level 1 to level 0. And if you want to start off with level 0 or level 1, doesn't matter. Okay, you're going to get the same end result. For simplicity of what it says on the assignment, I'm going to change that to level 0. I'm going to change this to level 1. Yes, it's asking, do you want that to correspond to your views? So really quickly as a recap, someone tell me the difference between the blue and the black level heads. Okay, so I know a few people asked that question this morning. Yes?
I think the black is without the floor plan, and the blue is it creates the floor plan.
Exactly. No, you're 100% correct. So notice that when I changed the level 1 and now level 0 and level 1 level heads, notice that in my floor plan, it also changed it to level 0 and level 1. Whereas if these were black, you actually would not see them in your project browser, okay? So for this exercise, it doesn't really matter if we have a floor plan for all of them. We're not actually creating a house where we have 5 different levels, okay? So
But is there any way to change it from blue to
yes, and I'll show you how to do that here in just a sec once we create the next one. Yeah. So for level 1, let's see, level 1 is 6 feet. Sorry, my mouse is being a little goofy. It was doing this last class too. Whenever I start recording, it starts to jump a little bit. So we're going to change that to 6 feet. All right, I'm just going to hit 6 and enter. You don't need to hit the little foot hashtag, okay? So you don't need to go 6 feet, 0 inches. You don't need to do that. You can just type in 6 and enter, and that will be equivalent to 6 feet, okay? So the next is going to be level 2, which is what? Maybe you guys can just call them out as I go through. 8.6. So I'm going to click on architecture and then over to level. That will be where our different datums are. I'm going to click on level, and this is where you can check and uncheck the make plan view box, okay? If you want a floor plan, so maybe in the example that we're building a house where you actually want to see the level 2 floor plan or level 3, 4, 5, whatever, then you're going to leave this checked. If you don't care about actually having a floor plan, you can uncheck that box. And that's when you're going to get a black level head. Okay, so 8.6. So I can get this 2 different ways. I can either hover my mouse over my screen. Notice that incrementally it's going up by 6 inches. Okay, so if I was to click down right now, I would get that 8.6 level head. I can also do it a second way. I can go over to my draw tools and I can click on the pick lines button. The pick line button is equivalent to offset. So if you're using AutoCAD a lot, it's the same thing as offset. So I know that my next level is 2.5 feet above level 1, and I'm going to change the offset to 2 feet 6 inches, okay? So 2 space 6. I don't need to hit the feet or the inches, just 2 space 6, enter, and Revit will take that as 2 feet 6 inches. So now if I hover my mouse over the level 1 level head, it will go ahead and put that little dashed line just above that, telling me that's where my level head will open up or will be placed. Okay? So I'll go ahead and click, and now we have level 2 at 8 foot 6. All right? So I'll quickly go through and do the other ones. What's the next one? 11. So that's going to be same thing. Offset's going to be 2.5 feet. And what's level 13? So we're going to change that to 2 feet.
14.6.
And then 14.6. So that's the next one's going to be 1 foot 6. Enter. Okay. So there's all of my levels. I have levels 0 through 6. All right. Last class we talked about cleaning up our level heads. Right now this is a very kind of chaotic situation here. All right, I guess chaotic in the terms of architecture. But you can see that they're all overlapping. They don't look good. If you plotted this sheet, it wouldn't make any sense, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna click on the level head, and if you click on this little zigzag here, that will allow us to break the level line, okay? And from there, I can use these little blue toggles or these blue grips, and I can move them around accordingly, all right? So I might move this one up here, might move this one over here. Okay, I can start to kind of clean these up a little bit so that they're actually legible.
Can you just change the scale of drawing as well?
I'm sorry?
Can you just change from an 1/8 scale drawing to?
You could. That would actually make them smaller, but I'm going to go ahead and say I don't want to change the scale of it, because if I want my floor plans to be, or my elevations to be at an 1/8 scale, I need to ultimately know how to fix that without changing the scale. Okay, so just really quickly go through and clean these up. All right, so there's our different levels. We have levels 0 through 5. Okay, so now we can move on to the wall types. So I'm going to go to level 0 on my floor plan. That's where I'm going to start drawing my walls. Ideally, I'm going to draw all my walls in between the existing elevation markers, okay? That's just kind of a nice place to start drawing. Don't start drawing out over here, because then everything that you do is not going to show up on your elevations unless you go through and move all your elevation tags, okay? But so working in between the 4 elevation tags is theoretically usually where you want to start.
If by mistake I draw out of the elevation, is there any way to move it?
You could,
aside?
yeah. We'll talk about that. I think next class we're going to talk about different view types. You could select your elevation tags. You could move them away so that they start to pick up your work. But for what we're doing today, we'll simply just work with inside all of them. All right. So I'm going to click on the first wall, and we're going to create wall type 1. So wall type 1 is very, very simple. 4-inch wood stud, 5/8 chipboard on both sides, okay? For practical and simplicity reasons, I don't know how technical everyone is in the class. If you want to be really technical and you want the 4-inch stud to be 3.5 inches, by all means, I'm going to go ahead and just say 4 inches, and I'm going to create them as 4 inches, okay? Just because I know not everyone here is necessarily up to speed on actual construction details. So I'll usually talk in more simple terms. All right, so 4-inch wood stud, 5/8 chipboard on both sides. So I like to start with a wall type that's already kind of almost there. And then, in fact, there's probably one in the interior side that is correct, but we're going to go ahead and create one from scratch. So I'm going to click on generic 5-inch. I'm going to go to edit type on my properties dialog, and I'm going to go to duplicate. So why do I duplicate this? Why do I duplicate this and not just go ahead and start editing it?
Because it changes everything.
Correct.
From that point forward.
Well, you might actually want to keep generic 5-inch. You might use a 5-inch wall later in the future. And if by chance you already drew maybe several walls with that, you don't want to risk changing all of the walls that you already have in your project. So it's good to remember that changing a wall type is a global activity, okay? So if you're ever going to create something new, always duplicate it and start from scratch so that you have a nice fresh canvas in front of you. You know you're not going to edit anything else in the model, okay? I've seen horror stories of that happening in a project that's been worked on for 6 months, and someone who's not as familiar with Revit comes in and just goes to town. And ultimately it does happen, but we can work on not doing that. So we're going to click on duplicate. We're going to type in wall type 1. All right, hit OK. And from here, I'm going to go under construction, structure. I'm going to click on edit. That will open up our edit wall assembly box. Okay. And you can see here that the wall is extremely simple right now. It's a 5-inch stud. That's all it is. Okay. So we're going to change this to 4. That's going to be our wood stud. Right now, there's no material associated with our wall. So if you want to change that to wood, you can. I can type in wood in my material browser. And I can click on softwood lumber. That's Revit's equivalent to just good old-fashioned basic wood that you'd buy at Home Depot. That's all it is, okay? So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And now we need to add gypboard to both the interior and exterior side of our wall assembly. Notice here on the bottom, it says interior side, and up here on the top, it says exterior side. So all of my assemblies that I want to add to my interior side of my wall, I'm going to click on Insert, and I'm going to click down and move that layer to below my core boundary. So now this will be visible on the interior side of my wall. So if you're drawing a house and you're using one of these wall types, this is what you're going to see on the interior side of your house. All right, I'm going to change this to a finish. And I'm going to change the material to gypsum wallboard. That should already be inside Revit. Type in gypsum wallboard, and I'm going to hit OK. Notice if I go over to appearance, graphics. Let's see, gypsum wallboard has no graphics or has no surface pattern. That's okay. You typically wouldn't ever show in an actual construction drawings, you wouldn't show a pattern for this because you're always going to paint it or something. You're going to do something on top of the gypsum wallboard. Suppose you couldn't, but for simplicity purposes, there's going to be no surface pattern for gypsum wallboard. So we'll go ahead and hit OK. And we're going to go ahead and add this. We're going to make this 5/8 of an inch. That's a typical gypboard size. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and add the same thing to our exterior wall assembly. So I'm going to go to Insert, move it up, change this to Finish, change my material. It's already there. And we'll make that 5/8 of an inch. All right. So that's wall type number 1. All right. We're done with that. We're going to go ahead and hit OK. We're going to hit OK again, and now notice that we have our new wall type over in our properties boundary or our properties dialog box. Okay, I'm going to, I'll come to you in just a sec. With my basic line tool, I can go ahead and draw my first wall segment. It's going to be 6 feet. All right, so I can click on 6 feet right there, hit Escape, and there's our first wall assembly. If we go over to our properties box, the first one is going to be a base constraint of level 0. That will be consistent with all of our walls for this exercise. And our top constraint is going to be level 1. Okay, so that's good. We're done with the first wall type. All right, so if we look at the next wall type 2, notice that the only difference between this one and wall type 1 is that we actually just put plywood on the exterior side versus the gypboard. All right. Yes, question.
Why you build the dimension for the wall 6 feet? Where is it in the...
Right here. Where does it say that?
Oh, yeah.
Under step 3. Okay. Yes.
Okay, so on just quick edification for myself, the edit assembly where it says finish 1 and finish 2, what's the difference?
Finish 2 would be if you had multiple finishes. Okay, so if you actually had a finish with another finish on top of that, which doesn't happen very often, you could use a second one. But I always use finish 1 all the time. Okay? So I think I've only had to use finish 2. I'm trying to even think of a time when I've even had to do it, but maybe once or twice.
So it's like once in a blue moon type thing.
Yes, exactly. So let's create wall type 2 real quick, and then I'll just skip to the end. I'm not going to create all the wall types here in front of you. So I'm going to click on wall again. We're going to create the second one. Wall type 1 already pops up, so I'm going to go to edit type, and I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, I'm going to duplicate wall type 1. Yes.
Do you have to change the levels, like the floor plan, when you create like each of the wall, like the first wall be on level 0, then you?
Yes, we will. For this one, we will do that. Okay, so I'm going to go to duplicate, and by default, Revit will always just go up in increments of 1, so it predicts that you're going to create wall type 2. So I'm going to hit OK, and then I'm going to go to edit type. So notice that we already have everything that we just created for wall type 1. Okay, so we're already halfway there. We don't need to create the interior. We already have that. We don't need to change the stud. We already have that. So I'm going to change my exterior finish, which right now we're just going to change it to plywood. So I'm going to go over to material. I'm going to type in, I think Revit calls it sheathing. So plywood sheathing, hit OK. I'm going to change the thickness to a 1/2 inch. Okay, enter. And that's it. Wall type 2 is done. All right, and then from there we're going to leave a 2-foot gap. And I'm going to draw, actually before I draw it really quickly, let's go ahead and look at our constraints. So for our second wall type 2, our base constraint will remain level 0 or level 1 and for some of your guys' projects. But we're going to change the top constraint from level 1 to level 2. All right, so now I can make sure that I have a 2-foot gap between my walls, and I'm going to draw that to be 6 feet. All right, so that's wall type 2. I'm going to go ahead and jump back over to my other project so that we can just see the finished product. All right, you can see what that looks like. So in the previous, what I just showed you, I created wall type 1, wall type 2. I'll go ahead and create the very last one, okay? I'll delete that and I'll create the last one for you as kind of seeing the more difficult side of this. Let me just delete this text for now. Okay, so we have our 4 wall types, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to create wall type 5. So I'm going to go to wall, architectural, wall type 4, that's good. I'm going to go ahead and edit type, duplicate it. We're going to call it wall type 5. And hit OK. Oh, it's already saying it's in use because technically I've already created it. Okay, so I'm going to go to wall type 5. I'm not going to go through every one of these, adding every one of these layers, but you can notice that from keeping the original wall type, I was able to keep the structure, okay, or just edit the structure. I added a metal stud instead of the wood. Changed the dimension, okay, so it's now 6 inches instead of 4. We retained the gypsum wallboard on the interior, and we actually retained the plywood sheathing. We added that for wall type 3, and then we just added a couple more layers, okay? We added mortar and we added common brick, okay? So that's going to be our entire wall assembly for wall type 5. Yes?
So what does it mean there little boxes kind of check? Because I noticed some of mine were unchecked.
These ones right here, wraps. I'll go over it here a little bit later today, okay? What it means is that, in kind of a simple form, is that when you turn the wall, that material, that finish actually turns the wall with it, okay? To whereas you could uncheck it and technically it would stop. It would stop doing it and it wouldn't wrap the edge of the wall, okay? We won't be dealing with that really in this class. That becomes a much more technical side of creating walls, but kind of in a simple form, that's what that means. I usually always leave it checked because I always typically want it to turn the corner. All right, so those are going to be all of our finishes for wall type 5. I'm going to hit OK again, and we'll go ahead and draw that real quick. All right, so we're going to change our base constraint remains at level 0, and our top constraint is going to stay at level 5. All right, 2-foot gap. I think I actually have a little bit more of a gap when I originally created this. Okay, and I'll draw this 6 feet. All right. So you can see what the end result looks like. We have a variety of all of our exterior. So this is my exterior side of the wall. These are all my interior sides of the wall. Okay. You can see here that we have brick, CMU block, cement plaster, and these all have gypboard on the exterior. So that's ultimately what you should be finished at. Okay. Any questions about any of those steps whatsoever?
Just one.
Yes.
Whenever it comes to the walls, the ones that you will assemble, that's what goes into the wall. That's what's into creating the wall, correct?
Say that one more time.
For example, we have plywood and everything else. Whatever we see in real life, that's what you want us to create in the system, correct?
Yes, exactly. You are pretending that that's what you're creating in real life is what you're putting into the wall.
It's
Exactly.
not just 2 lines. It's actually the depth of the wall itself as well.
Exactly. So what Revit has given you, it's given you a wall assembly that is true to the actual dimensions in real life. So every firm has a different viewpoint on this. My firm actually doesn't like to show all the finishes in construction drawings. We only show the stud because a lot of contractors will look at, if they see all those layers, they're gonna like, ugh. They're not gonna know what to do with all that, and it just kind of becomes confusing. Whereas you would typically only show those layers in your detailed wall assemblies.
What do we do with the blown installation or any types of installation? For example, in the blueprints, whenever they say
Mhm.
specific installation is supposed to be there, do we create that as part of the wall?
Yeah, no, not really. You can show insulation inside the walls, but typically we don't. Just for, I usually wouldn't talk about this right now. I will show you just really quickly how you might do that. So let's just say you wanted to add insulate, or you wanted to show insulation in this wall. You would go up to annotate, and there's a button here called insulation, and you simply draw it in. You can define the width of your insulation, whether it's 5 inches of bad insulation or 8 or whatever.
So
You can.
Revit really makes it easy.
It makes it very easy. You don't have to draw these lines that do that. So you can actually just define what the insulation is. So 5.5. Whoops, I did 5.5 feet.
Dr. Smith was right. Revit is much easier than AutoCAD. It's so simpler, as you would phrase.
Okay.
It is.
So you can see here that I can simply add my insulation like that. Okay. But another topic for another day. So any more questions about the critical thinking exercise? Yes.
I don't think I'm clear. Is when we create the walls, do we have, so for the first wall, it would be level 0 on
Mhm.
the floor plan. And when we create the second wall, we go to level 1 on the project browser.
Mhm.
We go to the next, but it seems like you did them all on level 0 on this one.
Yes. So the base constraint for this exercise
Would be 0.
is 0 for all my
So
walls.
it didn't matter. Okay.
Yes.
I understand.
So that all the base point is going to be exactly the same, to whereas the top constraint goes up by 1 level for every wall. Okay? So the main point of the exercise is just kind of understanding how to do that. Okay? Once we actually start doing this in our residence project, it'll start to become a little bit more of a real life situation in terms of adjusting your walls. When you're creating a wall on level 1, you don't necessarily want that wall to go all the way up to your roof. Maybe you want it to stop before it goes to level 2. So that's where you would start to define your different base constraints. And vice versa, when you're working on interior partitions on your level 2, you're creating bedrooms or you're creating walls in your bedrooms, your bathrooms. You don't want those walls to start on level 1. You want the base constraint to be level 2. And the top constraint might be level 3 or the roof or whatever it might be. Okay? So that's it for that.
But if by mistake I